Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are going to completely shatter the standard mental map you have of the United States. You know, we often think we have a solid grip on the basic layout, the borders, the extremes of the country, right? Because let's face it, we've all been staring at the exact same map since elementary school. But the actual reality on the ground, it's packed with bizarre geographic anomalies that basically defy all logic. So let's just get right into it. To kick things off, let's dive into a really simple question, just to test your assumptions right out of the gate. Take a second and ask yourself, where is the absolute southernmost point of the United States? Think you have your answer? Okay, keep it locked in, because we are going to come back to it a bit later. And honestly, it might just completely surprise you. Section 1, the map in your mind. Section 2, extremes of the Earth. To start rewiring how we see the map, let's look at the sheer physical extremes that actually challenge human survival. If you're picturing that standard flat classroom map we just talked about, it totally fails to convey the intense physical reality of the landscape. 134 degrees Fahrenheit. Death Valley, California holds the record for the hottest air ever recorded on Earth at that staggering temperature. I mean, it's a physical extreme that stretches the absolute limits of human comprehension, and it's sitting right here within US borders. And you know, our sense of scale gets even more distorted when we start looking at mountains. We usually picture the Himalayas when we think of towering peaks, right? But consider Mauna Kea over in Hawaii. Sure, its peak sits at 13,800 feet above sea level. However, if you measure its height straight from its true base, all the way at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean up to the top, it is actually significantly taller than Mount Everest. It just goes to show that our perception of extreme geography entirely depends on where you actually start measuring. Section 3, borders that defy logic. So, geography isn't just about towering mountains and record-breaking heat. It's also about the arbitrary, often frankly absurd lines that we humans draw on a map. Think about state lines for a second. They usually look like neat little grids, especially out west, where borders were basically just cut straight across the land. But Hawaii breaks that mold entirely. It's the only state whose borders do not possess a single straight line, since it relies completely on natural coastlines. And hey, speaking of human logic, the actual city of Washington isn't even located in Washington state. The capital and the state are literally on entirely opposite sides of the continent. Then, there's the incredibly strange case of Minnesota. There's this small part of the state known as the Northwest Angle, and it is completely separated from the rest of Minnesota by a massive lake. If you're standing on that tiny piece of land, you are totally, physically cut off from your own state, completely surrounded by Canada and water. You would literally have to cross international borders just to drive back to the rest of Minnesota. And if you want to feel truly isolated from the coast, just look at Nebraska. Nebraska holds the bizarre title of being the only state in the US that is triple landlocked. What that means is you would have to cross through 3 separate states in any given direction just to touch ocean water. Not only that, but it sits perfectly and equally distant from all oceans. It is the absolute geographic middle ground of North America. Section 4, breaking the compass. All right, this brings us right back to that question I asked you at the beginning of this explainer. Our standard compass relies on north, south, east, and west, right? But those directions get deeply confusing when you really zoom out. The true southernmost point of the USA is not in Florida, and actually it's not in Hawaii either. It is American Samoa. Because our standard maps so often just crop out territories to fit them neatly on a rectangular page, they completely skew our internal compass of where the country actually begins and ends. Now let's look way up north to Alaska. This is a state entirely defined by extremes. The contrast here is just staggering. Alaska is so extraordinarily huge that it holds about 20% of the total US territory. Yet remarkably, less than 1% of the total US population lives there. It is this massive, incredibly empty expanse of land that heavily skews the entire geographic center of the continent. But here is the most crucial point about Alaska's location, and it involves something called the 180th meridian. So this is an invisible geographic line of longitude that crosses straight through the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. And this line actually dictates the boundary of the hemispheres, which leaves a piece of the state sitting squarely over in the eastern hemisphere. Because that meridian crosses right through it, it creates the ultimate geographic paradox. It makes Alaska the most western state, the most northern state, and the most eastern state, all at the exact same time. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. One single state simultaneously holds 3 of the 4 extreme directional points of the compass. No way, right? Section 5. Rethinking your geographic reality. Well, we've journeyed from the record-breaking heat of Death Valley to the completely logic-defined borders of Minnesota, all the way up to the compass-breaking anomalies of Alaska. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final mind-bending thought to take away. If our standard, everyday maps miss so much of this actual reality, what else in the world are we looking at completely backwards? Keep questioning the map, keep exploring, and thank you so much for joining me to shatter these geographic illusions.